The Undertaker was in the game for years, so of course he went through some different phases, and we love most of them. American Badass Taker was great, but the most ruthless of Undertaker's phases, in my opinion, was the Ministry of Darkness Taker. To get the full picture of how the Ministry of Darkness was formed, we have to go back to Judgment Day in 1998, where Taker faced his brother Kane for the vacant WWF Championship, with Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest ref. Of course, with Austin as the ref, he taunted both of them and was being a menace the whole time. Undertaker and Kane ended up having enough and attacked Austin, but then they just got right back to scrapping each other. After Kane hit a chokeslam on Taker, Paul Bearer come down the ramp holding a chair, and it looked like he was going to try and take the Undertaker out with it to help out his son Kane. However, while Kane turned his back, he whacked the chair off the back of his own son. Paul Bearer told Taker to go for the pin, but Stone Cold refused to count the pinfall, and after hitting Taker with the chair and counting both men out, he declared himself the winner. Vince fired Austin after this, and it would actually be the first time that we'd hear Vince say "you're fired."
You're fired!
And we all know that he'd adopt that as a catchphrase over the years. So since Austin was fired, and we didn't get a legit finish to the match, we had to wait until Raw the night after to find out what the fuck was happening. When it got to Raw, Vince opened up the show saying that there wasn't a champion, so they would hold a 16-man tournament to decide who the champion was. Despite getting fired, Stone Cold turned up at Raw with a firearm, and Vince went to hide in a room backstage with his stooges Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe. As for Taker, he came out to the ring, and by his side was none other than Paul Bearer. They reunited, and Undertaker announced that there had been a reconciliation. He said Paul had come home to lead his Ministry of Darkness, and that they'd unleash a plague that the World Wrestling Federation had never seen. When Paul Bearer got the mic, he said, "Kane, I used you, boy." And then he continued to explain that Kane couldn't understand the darkness, so he'd be useless to him. Paul Bearer was actually so good on the mic, man. RIP to him. Anyway, Undertaker got the mic back, and he dropped a bombshell on Kane and everyone in the arena, when he said that it was actually him who set the fire at the funeral home all those years ago, and killed their parents and burned Kane. He said he did it because Kane was weak as a child, and he's weak now, and the Ministry don't have any room for the weak. As soon as Undertaker finished his promo, Kane came out to the entrance ramp with a casket, and challenged him to a casket match. Before the casket match got underway, we saw what was going on backstage with Vince and Austin, and well, Austin managed to get a hold of Vince and took him hostage. When it came to the casket match later in the night, we didn't get a definitive winner because Taker and Kane just destroyed the casket, and they scrapped up the ramp, and Taker and Bearer walked backstage while Kane was out cold, but he got up with a chair in hand and went after them. Meanwhile, with Austin still holding Vince hostage backstage, he pushed him to the ring, and we got that classic segment of Vince crying while Austin had the fake firearm to his head and pulled the biggest prank of '98. The week later on Raw, Stone Cold got rehired by Vince's son Shane O'Mac, and Shane dropped what was probably his hardest promo of his career, saying what we have all thought at some point, and that was that he was sick of seeing superstars come and go all because of Vince's fragile ego. Then we'd see Vince's ego in action, as he tried to make things as hard as possible for Austin, booking him into an I Quit match against Ken Shamrock to get rid of him. Vince had his stooges Pat Patterson, Jerry Briscoe and Sergeant Slaughter out there watching the match closely, obviously to make it harder for Austin to win. However, Mankind came out to sway the odds in Austin's favour, and he hit the mandible claw on Shamrock while the ref was out of it. Austin got a chair, pings it off Shamrock's head, wins the match, and gives a stunner to Briscoe, Patterson and Sergeant Slaughter to end the show. The week after, Vince tricked Patterson, Briscoe and Slaughter into a cage with Big Boss Man to make them pay for failing to cause Austin to lose. Boss Man put a beating on all three of them, but Austin would come to their rescue. Austin took out Boss Man, but Patterson's that much of an ass kisser to Vince that he picked up Boss Man's nightstick and hit Austin with it. Austin retaliated, and then Boss Man got the upper hand. Vince thought he had Austin right where he wanted him, but that was only until Shane McMahon came down the ramp and opened the cage door. Bossman was about to hit Shane with his nightstick, but before he did, Vince told him and the rest of them to get out the ring, and Stone Cold was left in there alone. Taker and Paul Bearer realised that this would be a good time to get their own back on Austin. They strolled down to the cage, and Taker locked himself inside with an already hurt Austin. The two scrapped for a bit, and Undertaker got the upper hand, but Kane came out and set the cage on fire with his pyro, and the Big Red Machine joined the Prince of Darkness and the Rattlesnake to scrap it out until the show went off the air. This took them to Survivor Series in the 16-man Deadly Games tournament, where Taker and Kane would get buys through the first round to face each other in the quarterfinals. Taker defeated Kane thanks to some tomfoolery from Paul Bearer, and then faced The Rock in the semi-final. However, a pissed off Kane interfered and got Taker DQ'd by chokeslamming The Rock. This obviously pissed Taker off, so they scrapped it out through the audience. And as for The Rock, he went on to join forces with Vince and the Corporation, winning the tournament and the WWF Championship. The night after on Raw, it was announced that The Undertaker and Austin would face each other at rock bottom. Taker came out to the ring and hit Austin in the head with a shovel to get him back for what happened at Judgment Day. In kayfabe, this caused Austin to black out during a live event, and the next week on Raw, we saw Stone Cold in a hospital bed. Then later on, Taker and Paul Bearer went to pay him a visit, knocking Austin out, and took him to a grave that Taker had already prepared for him. However, Taker decided not to bury him alive, but to try and embalm him alive instead. Taker carried the unconscious Austin to a funeral home and got him ready for embalming by speaking in tongues over Austin's unconscious body, showing us how evil this version of Taker can actually be. Luckily for Austin, Kane turned up and stopped the devilish plans by scrapping Taker, and we wouldn't see these three until the next week on Raw. So the next week on Raw, Stone Cold was roaming backstage looking for Taker, and as he was wandering around backstage, he asked what looked like a casual worker if they'd seen The Undertaker, and they said no. This person he asked was a young Stephanie McMahon. Stone Cold continued his search for Taker, and he found him. Well, actually, Taker and Bearer found Austin. They forced him into a freezer room and locked the doors. When Taker got to the ring and got the mic, he said that his plague over the WWF and the Ministry of Darkness was getting more powerful, but Stone Cold and Kane were getting in his way. He went on to say that he'll deal with Austin at rock bottom, and he'll deal with Kane now. So Kane came to the ring for a scrap, and that's exactly what they'd do. But Taker had a plan, and he had a group of patients from a mental asylum come down to the ring to attack Kane and put him in a straitjacket. However, Kane escaped, and so did Austin from the freezer room. So we got a wild goose chase where Austin was free, looking for Taker, and Taker was on the hunt for Kane. Taker finally caught Kane slipping backstage, putting him into a body bag while Paul Bearer would go and get the mental patients to come and help them out. While Bearer was gone, Stone Cold burst through the door and took out Taker, and as Paul and the patients returned, he saw nothing but the body bag on the floor. They placed it in an ambulance and sent it away, assuming it was Kane. However, it was actually Undertaker in that body bag. This gave Austin and Kane the perfect chance to get Paul Bearer with no protection from the Undertaker. They dragged the horrified Bearer to the ring, cut a little promo with him, and then proceeded to drag him outside to the streets of Baltimore, pushing him through a manhole to the sewers. A week later, we got a tag team match pitting The Undertaker and The Rock against Stone Cold and Mankind. Before we got to the match, we got a segment where we saw Vince having a meeting with Paul Bearer, The Rock and Shane O'Mac, planning and making sure that The Undertaker works with The Rock. Then after a few matches, we got Stone Cold coming out to the ring to give a promo, and he said over the last few months, Vince has thrown everything at him, and still somehow he's managed to get by. However, he said in a week's time at rock bottom, the stakes are stacked against him even more when he has to face Taker in a buried alive match. He continued to go over all the things Undertaker has tried to take Austin out, and said that he failed time and time again, and that he can expect no mercy from Stone Cold at rock bottom. As soon as Stone Cold finished on the mic, the lights went out, and Taker's music hit. Then with his evil ministry theme playing, we saw the cross symbol of Taker on the ramp. We'd hear Taker's voice saying that they've travelled down the highway to hell, and he said that he can sacrifice Austin's soul anytime that he wants. And tonight will be the night that Austin's journey stops in his purgatory, and that's exactly where he'll remain until rock bottom. Then he continued to say at rock bottom, he'll sacrifice him to the ministry. As Taker finished off by saying Austin will burn in hell, the symbol on the ramp burst into flames. When it came to the tag team match, Taker did what he said he was gonna do. He carried Austin up to the ramp with the help of his druids, and he tied Austin to the cross symbol, and Taker says that he's taken his mind, body and soul, and the only thing left is to bury him alive. This takes us to rock bottom and the buried alive match. After going back and forth, and both men almost burying each other alive, Austin stunned Taker into the grave and went after Paul Bearer. As he went after Bearer, Taker recovered and he got out of the grave, and then there was a mysterious explosion from inside the grave. Somehow, that explosion was Kane. He appeared in the grave, climbed out, and started scrapping it out with Taker. He started to get the better of Kane, and as he was ready to tombstone him, he noticed Austin was in a big fuck-off digger. Taker got distracted, got tombstoned by Kane, and was thrown into the grave. The driver of the digger had a bit of a hard time using the machine to bury Taker in the dirt, but the match did end in a stone cold victory eventually. After this, Taker was gone for a couple of weeks, obviously due to being buried alive. However, while he was gone, Farouk and Bradshaw formed the Acolytes, a tag team led by Don Callis, the Jackal. While on commentary, the Jackal had been talking about how the Acolytes will usher in a new age of tribulation, saying how he was the puppet master behind everything, controlling things from the shadows. And because of this, everyone thought the Jackal was going to be the mastermind and true power behind the Ministry of Darkness. However, Don Callis got released and went to ECW, and the Acolytes started to work for an unknown mysterious leader. On the final Raw of 1998, we saw X-Pac backstage speaking to someone called Dennis Knight, who wrestled as one of the Godwin twins. He took a hiatus from the WWF, and as he was in the locker room, X-Pac asked him why he was there. Dennis replied because he said to be there, but he didn't give a name. Later on in the show, the Acolytes attacked and abducted Dennis for some unknown reason. And then 2 weeks later, Taker returned, and the Prince of Darkness sat on a throne in the shape of his cross symbol, with the Acolytes next to him, and they had poor old Dennis Knight out cold on an altar sort of thing in front of them. Taker gave a chilling message, saying that everyone thought burying him alive would be his final resting place, but actually it was just sending him back to his origin, and every time they tried to destroy him, he gets more powerful. He went on to say that the power of darkness will be offered only to a chosen few, and that the ones who resist the temptation of the ministry will be punished. So basically, the people on the stage with him right then were the chosen few, and now a part of the Ministry of Darkness. Then, in another chilling moment, Taker went over to Dennis Knight and started speaking in tongues again. He then cut his hand, poured the blood in a cup, and all over Dennis. Then he announced that he was no longer Dennis Knight. He's now called Midian. Then he made him drink from the cup of blood and carved his symbol into the chest of Midian. This was by far Taker's scariest return and truly showed how evil he could be. He ended it off with another chilling message, saying that now we'll know why we're afraid of the dark, and we'll learn why. Then suddenly, a strike of lightning hits another Taker symbol, setting it on fire, creeping the fuck out of everyone. The next week, Taker came out to a massive pop despite being a heel, and he sat on his throne with the first members of the ministry, the Acolytes, Paul Bearer, and Midian by his side. The Undertaker announced that this wouldn't be the end of his sacrifices, but only the beginning. There'd be more sacrifices and rituals to come, and someone else would join the ministry at the Royal Rumble. When it came to the Royal Rumble, we found out who it'd be when during the Royal Rumble match, Mabel was entrant number 11 and ready to enter the match, but as soon as he went to make his entrance, the lights went out and Taker's music hit. When the lights came back on, we saw the Acolytes jumping Mabel. When Mabel saw Taker, it seemed like he was hypnotized or something. It was like it was some sort of mind control from just looking at Taker. Anyway, the Acolytes continued to attack him all the way through the arena to a car park where there was a hearse waiting for him. They put Mabel into the hearse, and the next night on Raw, he would return as Viscera, joining the ministry and now under the control of Undertaker. The Ministry was then supposed to face the Brood in a match, but Taker decided to sit back and watch, letting Mideon and Viscera do his bidding. The match ended in DQ after the Acolytes got involved, and then a brawl erupted in the ring. A bunch of refs ran down to the ring to stop the carnage. However, Taker made his way down to the ring with a smug look on his face, and for some reason, the Brood wouldn't let the refs help them. They just attacked the officials and threw them out the ring. The Ministry kept the beatdown going, absolutely destroying the Brood, and ended up putting a noose around the neck of Gangrel, and they started to choke him with it, throwing him over the top rope. Later that night, the Acolytes were scheduled to face Al Snow and Road Dogg, and they defeated them, and out came Mideon, Viscera, and 3 Druids to put even more of a beating on Road Dogg. Then, Undertaker and Paul Bearer came down to the entrance ramp, where Taker would take his hood down, and told the Acolytes to take off the Druids' hoods. And there stood the Brood. Gangrel, Edge, and Christian, adding even more evil members to the evil Ministry. The beatdown that the Ministry put on the Brood was actually some sort of initiation into the Ministry. And at the next pay-per-view, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Taker got the whole Ministry together to get a plan together. As Mideon had a match later that night with Big Boss Man, Taker told Mideon to take Boss Man's soul, and said that he got a message from a power beyond, saying that the Ministry's purpose begins on that night. The plan didn't go very well, as Mideon would lose to Boss Man after a Big Boss slam. However, everyone knew the Ministry wasn't going to let it slide. The other Ministry members came down to the ring, beat Boss Man up, and carried him away. It looked like we were going to get another sacrifice, and a new member of the Ministry, but that wouldn't happen. It would just make a huge enemy of Vince and the corporation, since their own enforcer in Bossman was taken from them. Luckily for the corporation and Bossman, he managed to escape, according to Michael Cole on commentary the next night on Raw. However, the Ministry would come down to the ring and let their evil plan to take over the WWF be known. Paul Bearer told Vince to listen carefully to what the Lord of Darkness had to say, and then handed Taker the mic. Taker said that in time, the WWF will belong to him, and that one by one, everyone will fall to the Ministry. He continued to say that when they took Bossman, he saw only a sample of the power that the Ministry possess, but they let him go, and next time, he won't be so lucky. He said that each soul they take will be in the name of a higher power than even Taker himself, and he said that the higher power has the key to Vince's heart and soul, and that he's amassed an army that will destroy Vince and his corporation. After saying that he'll own the WWF, Big Boss Man's music hits, and he comes to the ramp with a mic, challenging 3 of the Ministry to go against him and 2 of the corporation's guys. Mideon and the Acolytes would step up to the challenge for the Ministry, and they'd be up against the corporation's Ken Shamrock, Test, and Bossman. After scrapping for about 5 minutes, The Undertaker came out onto the entrance ramp with the rest of the Ministry, along with an abducted Shane McMahon. With a terrified Shane O'Mac in his hands, thinking he was about to get sacrificed, Taker said he wasn't going to do anything to Shane because Vince wouldn't care anyway. He gave him a letter to give to Vince, and said to tell him that it was from the Prince of Darkness. After this, Vince was scared shitless, and apparently even publicly stated that Mark Calloway was taking the gimmick too far, thinking that he's actually the Prince of Darkness. As Vince was so terrified, he threw Taker into an Inferno match with Kane on Raw, since Kane joined forces with the corporation after Vince promised him that he'll never have to be thrown into a mental asylum. In one of the earlier matches on Raw, Gangrel and Edge faced Public Enemy in a tag match, but lost, and as a result, the Brood was disciplined by the rest of the Ministry by a brutal beatdown. Then later on in the show, Taker gave a promo from backstage waffling some more about the higher power, how the Ministry is going to reign terror over the WWF, and that the Inferno match isn't going to take him out because some flames can't be extinguished, and the Lord of Darkness is one of them. He ended it by saying he's Vince's nightmare, and tonight, he intends to show just how serious he is with his threats, and the WWF will be his. Just like their Inferno match the year before, Taker defeated Kane again, but during the match, Vince said on commentary that the letter Shane gave him from Taker was really personal, and weirdly, Paul Bearer came over to the announce table to give Vince a little present. Vince opened the box, and there was a teddy bear in there which seemed to put a sad face on old Vinnie Mac, and it forced him to stop sitting at commentary. When Taker got the victory by setting Kane's leg on fire, he even had Vince crying at ringside after he burnt the teddy bear that we later found out was Stephanie McMahon's teddy bear from childhood. A week later on Raw, Taker had a match with Mankind. However, before the match got underway, Vince came to sit at commentary again and announced that Taker would be facing Bossman in a Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania. Mankind started to get the better of Taker on the outside, and Vince loved it. But when Taker reversed a chair shot and gave Mankind one of his own, Vince's face dropped, and Taker went right after him. As Taker was about to send Vince through the announce table, Big Boss Man came to his rescue and took Taker out with his nightstick. The Ministry would chase Vince and Boss Man through the crowd, and Taker ended the night with a chokeslam to Mankind. The next week, Taker and the Ministry surrounded Boss Man backstage and planned another sacrifice by attaching him to a Taker symbol. Boss Man managed to break free from the sacrifice symbol, and the corporation came out to give him a hand against the Ministry, even bringing the police with them to arrest the Undertaker, and that's exactly what they did. Weirdly, Taker just allowed himself to be arrested and had an evil, smug look on his face. Once the police got him into the police car, Vince started bragging and thought he'd finally got rid of the Prince of Darkness. However, the look on Taker's face told us that he had an evil, sadistic plan, and we'd see that plan in action the next week on Raw. After Shane's match, Shane and Vince were walking back up the ramp, and on the Titantron, it showed the Ministry of Vince's house. Vince tried to call the police, and they assumed it was a publicity stunt, so didn't respond. Then, Taker himself phoned Vince and asked if he knew where his family was. When we got to see what was happening next, we saw a burning Taker symbol in Vince's garden just outside the house, and Taker said that he was waiting for her to come home. Before the last match on Raw, Triple H was in the ring and called out Kane, as the week before he tried to hit Triple H with a fireball and hit Chyna right in the face with it. Kane came out to face Triple H and the two started scrapping. However, Vince came down to the ring to ask for Kane's help, saying that he's got trouble at home and he needs to help him now. He asked Kane to talk Taker out of harming his family, but when Kane got in the ring and faced Vince, he took off his mask and revealed himself to be the Undertaker in disguise. Taker grabbed Vince and the lights just went out. When the lights came back on, Taker was gone and Vince was just left there shaken up. This takes us to WrestleMania 15, where Taker faced Big Boss Man in a Hell in a Cell. The first video I ever made on this channel was actually on this match. The match itself wasn't that memorable, but what was the ending, and that's what made me make a video on it. Anyway, Taker got the win, and as his evil Ministry theme song started to play, the Brood came down from the rafters onto the top of the cell with a noose. They dropped it into the ring, and Taker hooked it around Bossman's neck. Then Paul Bearer started to raise the cell. Bossman was left there hanging and squirming, while the Ministry stood there sadistically. In the main event, Stone Cold beat The Rock for the WWF Championship, and the next night on Raw, he decided to give the belt back to Vince, with Vince thinking he was vacating the title, but actually, he just wanted his custom-made Smoking Skull title, which was previously taken by Vince and supposed to be at his house. When Vince got backstage, he told Stephanie to phone home and get the belt back to the arena to get it back to Stone Cold. However, in the ring, Undertaker and the Ministry had Sable hostage, threatening to hurt her if Vince didn't come to them. Vince did come to the entrance ramp, but he realised that it could be a trap, and now that he left Stephanie alone, she could be in danger. When he got back to check on Stephanie, she was gone. Luckily for Vince, Ken Shamrock found her after making Christian spill on her location, and he returned her safely to Vince. However, when they got the Smoking Skull belt back to the arena, The Rock and Shane kept it for themselves, while Vince took Stephanie away from the arena to protect her. Vince told Shane to give the belt straight to Austin, but he started to defy his dad's orders. The week later, Taker came to the ring and he announced that he'll be going after Stephanie again, but this time to actually sacrifice her. Since Christian gave up her whereabouts the week before, he was punished by the ministry, and they didn't stop there. They also abducted Ken Shamrock for saving Stephanie. Before the show went off the air, Taker did sacrifice someone, but it wasn't Stephanie or Ken Shamrock. It was Ryan Shamrock, Ken's younger sister. The next week, Shane came out to the ring with the corporation minus Vince, which he called the New Corporation. However, when they got to the ring, Ken Shamrock was pissed off and he asked Shane where the corporation was when his sister had been sacrificed the week before. Shane said he'd give Ken an answer later on in the evening, and he fired Vince's stooges Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe. Then, when Vince did come to the ring to see what the fuck was going on, Shane made it clear that he'll be taking over the corporation as the new owner, and he slapped his own dad in the face. Later on in the show, Taker was about to sacrifice Ken Shamrock, and Taker decided to take two souls. He tried to make Gangrel and Edge sacrifice Christian, but they refused and turned on the ministry. They started a brawl, and during the brawl between the Brood and the ministry, Undertaker disappeared. Ken Shamrock ended up coming down to the ring later on, calling out the Undertaker and even dropping his government name. Taker ended up turning up, but not alone and with the full ministry, and they put a beat down on Shamrock. Luckily for Shamrock, Triple H and Big Boss Man from the New Corporation came out to help even the numbers. Or so we thought. They started to attack Shamrock along with the ministry, and Shane O'Mac stood on the ramp smiling cunningly. The week after on Raw, the Brood would face the ministry's acolytes in a tag team match, and Taker gave them strict orders to absolutely destroy them. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't get the job done as Shamrock interfered in the match, and you already know this pissed Taker off, so he and Viscera beat up the acolytes. Later on, while Vince and Stephanie had a sit-down interview with Michael Cole, Midian turned up and Vince chased him down. He assaulted him and tried to run him over. Luckily for Midian, he ended up getting in the car himself and he drove away. When it came to Backlash, Undertaker beat Ken Shamrock in a match and also announced that we would finally see the arrival of the higher power that he'd been waffling about this whole time, and he said that the ministry must prepare for the arrival when they were backstage. Before the main event got underway, which was Stone Cold vs The Rock for the title with Shane as the special guest ref, Vince told Stephanie to wait in the limo for him until the end of the match. After Stone Cold won, and Vince finally gave him the Smoking Skull title belt, the cameras went back to the limo, and the ministry was trying to get to it. The security ordered the limo to drive to get Stephanie to safety. However, when we saw inside the limo, it was actually Taker driving the limo, and he menacingly turned to Stephanie and asked where she'd like to go. Since Taker and the ministry finally had Stephanie in their grasp, they planned to sacrifice her the next night on Raw. Taker demanded that Vince gave him the contract stating that he now owns the company, and Vince finally obliged, and he went to give Taker the papers and get his daughter back, but when he got there, Taker wasn't there. When Taker and the ministry came out to sacrifice Stephanie, we found out that it wasn't that he was going to sacrifice her, but he was going to marry her in an evil ritual. Luckily for Stephanie, Ken Shamrock came down to try and stop her from having to become the Princess of Darkness, but Ken couldn't get through the ministry members. The same went for Big Show, but then, as Paul Bearer says Taker can finally seal the union of darkness by kissing his bride, the glass shatters and Stone Cold comes down to save Stephanie. He took out Midian with a stunner, the Acolytes and Viscera with a chair, and he forced Taker and Bearer to retreat. Even though Taker seemed to have failed his evil plans thanks to Stone Cold, this was undoubtedly the most evil and insane version of Taker. Of course, this wouldn't be the true end of the ministry. It would be the start of a new alliance with their rival faction, the Corporation, making up the corporate ministry. This officially happened 3 days later, when the first ever SmackDown aired. The show opened with Stephanie and Vince coming to the ring, and Vince saying that he's made a few mistakes in the past, but he wants to change, and show some gratitude to the people that have helped him and his family. He thanked Ken Shamrock, Big Show, and Stone Cold for their attempts to save Stephanie. And then Stephanie took the mic, saying how she'd never felt so powerless and violated in her life. Eventually, Shane and the corporation came out, with Shane asking what happened to the most ruthless tycoon in the history of the world, and why was Vince out there apologising for how business used to be run. He then said the fact that Vince was out there thanking Stone Cold after everything he did to him was making him sick. He then kicked them out of the ring, and Vince and Stephanie left the arena. Shane went on to say that there were 2 thorns in his side, and those 2 men were on Shane and the corporation's hit list, and those 2 men were Stone Cold and The Rock. Later on, Stone Cold and Rock were put into a tag team match against 2 of the corporation's members. When Shane asked for the volunteers, Triple H put his hand up and was entered into the match. But when Shane asked if there were any takers for the other spot, the lights went out and there appeared a taker on the Titantron. And not just any taker, but The Undertaker. He sent a message to Stone Cold saying that he ruined his ceremony and stopped him from having Stephanie as his bride and servant, and said that Monday night, Stone Cold played the role of the spoiler, but tonight, he'll be playing multiple roles: judge, jury, and executioner. So in the main event of the first ever SmackDown show, we got a weird tag team match with rival teams facing each other to get at their rivals. Undertaker teamed up with Triple H to face Austin and The Rock. Before that happened though, we got a promo from Stone Cold and The Rock, and they weren't really getting along well as a tag team should. Shane came out, interrupted them, and gloated about how it was good that they couldn't get along. And then the lights went out. The Ministry's evil music started playing, and there stood Undertaker alongside Shane O'Mac. Shane asked if they were beginning to feel the power, and he said that he'd help spell it out a bit more for them. And that's just when the whole corporation stepped out to join them, and this marked the alliance of the corporation and the Ministry of Darkness, which from this moment would be called the Corporate Ministry. Before the main event got underway, we saw Shane giving the Corporate Ministry a pep talk, showing us that Shane was kind of the boss of the faction, or so we thought. Anyway, the main event finally came, and towards the end of the match, the Corporate Ministry came to the ring and interfered, which meant a DQ win for Austin and Rock, but they were outnumbered and a brawl broke out. Luckily, Test, Big Show and Ken Shamrock came down to help Austin and Rock because they were all former members of the corporation and wanted to get them back for kicking them out or betraying them. Shane decided it was a good time to try and throw in a chair to Taker, but Vince came down to ringside to try and stop him. Shane did manage to throw the chair into the ring, but Vince didn't back down, and he knocked Shane down with a punch and jumped into the ring to try and stop Undertaker from smashing Austin with the chair. However, this didn't work out too well for him as Taker hit Vince with a lethal chair shot. Luckily, Stone Cold recovered and pulled off a stunner on Taker and Shane to end the night. On the May 3rd episode of Raw, the Corporate Ministry came to the ring, with Shane showing his power-hungry and stuck-up ways. Triple H got the mic and started cutting a promo on The Rock, showing that was his main feud. And for The Undertaker, he'd been mainly feuding with Stone Cold. Stone Cold and Taker were supposed to throw down Over the Edge, with Shane as the special guest ref. Taker made a promise that he would come out of the pay-per-view as the WWF champion, and he also said that Stone Cold would be sacrificed on the Raw after Over the Edge. But of course, the Owen Hart tragedy set things back a little. Anyway, after the promos on Rock and Stone Cold, 4 members of the corporation stood on the entrance ramp, forming their own faction to fight against the Corporate Ministry. Mankind, Big Show, Test, and Ken Shamrock, who had called themselves the Union. They stormed down to the ring, all with 2x4s in hand, looking for a fight. After forcing the Corporate Ministry to retreat, they all got put in matches with members of the Corporate Ministry, and Shane would face Vince one-on-one. Before that though, when Vince got to the arena with Linda and Stephanie, he told them to go back to the hotel because he didn't want them to see him beat some respect into Shane. He didn't really get to do that like he wanted though, as he started getting thrown around the locker room by Undertaker, but Vince got the chance to get his hands on Shane in a match one-on-one later. So since Vince was already beat up, you'd think Shane had this one in the bag, but Vince battled through and he managed to hit Shane with a stunner, grabbing the win. In the main event, it would be Stone Cold versus The Rock in a lumberjack match, with the corporate ministry members as the lumberjacks on the outside. However, it wasn't much of a battle between Rock and Austin. They helped each other fight off the corporate ministry members, but it wouldn't be enough as they were outnumbered. Luckily, Vince came out to the entrance ramp and brought the Union with him and nearly everyone else on the roster with him. And eventually, after a huge brawl, it ended with Undertaker and Triple H throwing Austin and Rock off the stage, which in kayfabe broke Rock's arm. The next week on Raw, Vince and the Union came to the ring to call out Shane and the Ministry, and the Ministry came to the entrance ramp to start another brawl. But before a brawl got underway, Commissioner Shawn Michaels popped up on the Titantron, and he said that Shane's matchmaking the week before wasn't bad, but he could do better. He looked at the card for Over the Edge, he crossed out everything that was there, and he said that the match between Taker and Austin, that had Shane as the special guest ref, would be changed to have 2 referees, and the second ref would be Vince. Then HBK changed up the Raw card as well, booking a match between the Acolytes, Bradshaw and Farouk, against each other, in a lumberjack match with the Union as the Lumberjacks. Also a nightstick on a pole match with Big Boss Man vs Test, Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson versus the Mean Street Posse, with the stipulation that the losers leave the company forever. He also booked Ken Shamrock vs Chyna, Big Show vs Paul Bearer, which made poor Paul pass out when he announced it, Mideon and Viscera vs Cactus Jack in a hardcore handicap match, Sable vs Deborah in an evening gown match, which doesn't really have anything to do with the Ministry, but we're not complaining. And finally, the main event would be a 6-man tag match between Taker, Triple H and Shane O'Mac versus Stone Cold, The Rock and Vinnie Mac. HBK said this match also needed a special guest ref, and only one guy could ref this sort of show-stopping match, implying that it'd be him. But before he could say anything else, Shane caught on, and he said that it can't be him because he's all the way in Texas. However, Shawn said he knew he was going to react like that because he's a Nimrod, and said that was the reason why he sent 3 guys in riot gear there, and asked them to reveal themselves one by one. The first officer stepped forward, and was revealed to be Pat Patterson. Then he asked another officer to step forward, which was revealed to be Jerry Briscoe, and when he asked the last officer to step forward, and asked for the music to hit, there stood HBK himself dancing to his iconic theme music. So it turned out HBK wasn't in Texas, and he could ref the match. The first match was the Big Show vs Paul Bearer match. It didn't last long at all, as it only took a big boot and an elbow drop from Big Show for Paul Bearer to be out cold and lying there motionless. Big Show grabbed the mic, and he asked HBK if he could face Taker instead, so he can give him a beating. However, Taker brought the Ministry with him, and they all attacked Big Show, which led to the rest of the Union coming down to help him with 2x4s in hand, and they forced the corporate Ministry to retreat. In the nightstick on a pole match, Bossman managed to get hold of his nightstick and whack Test over the head with it to get the win, and Cactus Jack got the win in his hardcore handicap match against Mideon and Viscera. Unfortunately, when it was time for the Acolytes to face each other, Bradshaw and Farouk refused to wrestle each other. However, Farouk said on the mic that they wouldn't fight each other, but everyone knew who would win anyway. This pissed Bradshaw off, causing a bit of an argument, and the two finally started to scrap. After finally getting the lumberjack match going, Mideon and Viscera came down to the ring and stopped the match, and while Mideon and Viscera were trying to sort out the issue between the Acolytes, the Union got in the ring with their 2x4s, and most of the Ministry retreated, except for Viscera. He was a bit too slow and couldn't get away, so he ended up taking a beating from the Union, while the others got away. After this was the Mean Street Posse versus Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe match, and Patterson and Briscoe got the win, meaning that the Mean Street Posse would have to leave the World Wrestling Federation forever. Next was the Shamrock vs Chyna match, and Chyna came to the ring with Triple H by her side. Shamrock kept saying that he didn't want to fight her, and Chyna pushed him to try and get a reaction. Shamrock said to Triple H if he doesn't take her spot, he's gonna beat his ass. And Chyna slapped Shamrock, causing Shamrock to get so pissed off, he dropped an F-bomb. Chyna punched Shamrock this time, and Shamrock reacted, grabbing Chyna, but Triple H attacked from behind. Shamrock knocked him down with a punch and started to snap, giving Chyna a belly-to-belly suplex. After this, he kicked the steel steps and walked to the back, and that was just the end of it. Now it was time for the main event, and HBK came to the ring to be the special guest ref. As soon as Vince got to the ramp, Shane threw him into the ring, and a brawl just got underway. Taker gave Vince a chokeslam right off the bat, and Triple H and Rock went to war on the outside. Vince got tombstoned right in the middle of the ring, and Stone Cold still hadn't made his entrance yet. Eventually, Stone Cold came out and went straight for Undertaker. Stone Cold hit Shane with a stunner while everyone was outside the ring except Vince, and Vince tried to pin Shane and grab the win. However, Stone Cold dragged Vince off him and gave Shane another stunner and grabbed the win himself. The next week on Raw, Shane, Bossman, Mideon, Viscera and the Acolytes came to the ring so Shane could announce that the Union's going to struggle to get to the arena tonight due to some car issues, and he said that the corporate ministry has a 3-man hit list: Stone Cold, The Rock and Vince, who's up first and should lock his door. And that's exactly what Vince did. He locked himself in a room with his stooges, but the corporate ministry still went after him, of course. The Undertaker, Triple H and Chyna ended up popping out of a room when he opened the door, and we saw Vince getting stretchered away. After this, the corporate ministry was seen planning their next attack, and Taker said that he'd deal with Austin. He did this by waiting till Stone Cold was cutting a promo and interrupting it with the ministry. However, the plan didn't work very well, as just as they were about to jump Austin, the Union showed up and started a brawl with the ministry. To send a message to Taker, Stone Cold grabbed Paul Bearer, threw him in the ring, and gave him a stunner, putting an end to the corporate ministry's evil plans. The Undertaker was set to face The Rock in a casket match next, and during the match, we saw a clip from backstage of the corporate ministry and the Union scrapping. Triple H, Chyna and Shane came down to the ring to cause some havoc and keep the match in Taker's favour. Triple H hit The Rock's broken arm with his sledgehammer and put him in the casket, winning the match for Taker. And after locking The Rock in the casket, Triple H started to smash his sledgehammer onto the casket. Once the casket was taken to the back, we saw a bloody Rock on a stretcher being put into an ambulance. This meant that the corporate ministry had taken out 2 of their men on their hit list, but there was 1 person left to take out, and that was Stone Cold. The ministry hid backstage to try and catch him lacking, but the Union somehow ended up jumping them instead. This meant that we would get to the main event without Stone Cold being taken out, and Triple H would have to face the Texas Rattlesnake one-on-one. After going back and forth for a while, we saw Undertaker's symbol being lowered into the ring, and it seemed like the ministry had one more trick up their sleeve, and that trick was to sacrifice Stone Cold in the middle of the match. Fortunately for Stone Cold, the Union came to back him up and took out most of the corporate ministry. Taker tried to handcuff Stone Cold to the symbol, but he managed to reverse him, and he handcuffed him to his own symbol, and Taker was raised to the roof. Now we come to Over the Edge, and this is of course one of the darkest days in pro wrestling history, the night Owen Hart died. This show definitely shouldn't have gone on, but as we know it did. And the last few matches on the card were an 8-man elimination tag team match, pitting the Union against ministry members. The Rock would face Triple H, and Taker would finally be able to get his hands on Stone Cold, with Austin's title on the line. On the Sunday Night Heat before the pay-per-view, Vince was attacked by the corporate ministry. They broke his ankle, in kayfabe obviously, hoping that he couldn't make it to be the special ref for the main event, which came into play later. The Union managed to defeat the ministry after Mankind hit Bossman with a mandible claw and submitted him, and before it was time for Rock and Triple H and Chyna attacked The Rock backstage, with Rock still having a broken arm. When it actually came to the match, Triple H got DQ'd after punching ref Earl Hebner, but they continued to brawl even after the match finished, with Triple H taking over with a steel chair and Chyna getting involved as well. Luckily for Rocky, Mankind came down to help him. After this, it was finally time for the main event, Stone Cold vs Taker for the title, with what was supposed to be 2 special guest refs. However, since Vince got beat up and his ankle broken. It meant that Vince wouldn't make it, and the only special guest ref would be Shane, giving Taker a huge advantage. But as Shane got to the ring, we found out that we'd be getting 2 special guest refs after all. Pat Patterson came down in the stripes to take Vince's place. However, Undertaker chokeslammed Patterson before Austin even got to the ring. Then, Vince's other stooge, Jerry Briscoe, came to the ring in his stripes and took Patterson's place. He got to do a bit more than Patterson and counted a 2 count for Austin, but Taker took him out of the game as well. Finally, Vince would come down to the ring himself, on 2 legs and no broken ankle. Stone Cold hit Taker with a stunner, looking like he was about to win, but Shane stopped Vince from counting the pinfall. Austin, Vince and Shane got into an argument, and Shane pushed Vince into Austin, causing Austin to fall into a roll-up by Taker, which allowed Shane to make a dead fast count, handing Taker the win, and the title was now with the corporate. To kick off the show, the corporate ministry came to the ring with an Undertaker symbol and some druids, and JR said on commentary that the greater power that Undertaker's been waffling about for so long would finally be revealed on this night. Taker confirmed this when he got on the mic, and Vince came out onto the entrance ramp, saying that Taker screwed Stone Cold over the edge, so he's going to screw over Taker when he goes up against Stone Cold in a rematch in the main event. However, Shane chimed in, and he said that the title won't be on the line, but the match will go ahead. Vince then announced that he had faced The Undertaker himself because he wants a piece of him, after everything he's put his family through, and turning his own son against him. Shane said that he liked that Vince had finally found his great brutes, and he likes to reward bravado. So Shane said that if by some miracle Vince can beat Taker, the WWF Championship will be on the line in the main event. However, he said if any union members get involved, Stone Cold will never get a title shot ever again. When the Vince vs Taker match got underway, the ref tried to stop Taker from absolutely demolishing Vince, but Taker kept pushing the ref away. This forced the ref to call for a DQ, and it gifted Vince the win. This meant that the main event match between Taker and Stone Cold would be a title match after all. Before the match though, we got to see Undertaker backstage, and he said that he had not failed the greater power. When the match started, the two brawled on the outside for a while, and when we finally got into the ring, Stone Cold hit a stunner on Taker, but Paul Bearer dragged the ref out the ring while he was counting the pin. As it was looking like Stone Cold had the upper hand, the corporate ministry came out to the ring and helped tangle Austin up in the ropes. Finally, it was time to reveal who the greater power was. Sort of. They came down to the ring, dressed like a druid, with the commentary team guessing that it was Shane under the robe, as he wasn't out there with the rest of the ministry. Unfortunately, we wouldn't even get to find out who it was. It was only Stone Cold who could find out for some reason. And when Austin got to see who it was, he looked very pissed off. And this made everyone wonder who it was even more. And so we'd have to wait until next week on Raw to find out who the greater power really was. Vince comes out to open the show, looking like he wants a scrap, and he said that he was intrigued by the higher power, and wants to meet him. He said some people think it's Commissioner Shawn Michaels, some people think it's a member of the McMahon family, and some people even think it's Jake the Snake. I don't know where that one came from, but that's what he said. Anyway, he continued to say, whoever it is, he'll go one-on-one with the greater power in a match. Vince said that he thought it could be Shane himself, and that he'd have no problem having to fight Shane. He went even further, saying that he'll put up 50% ownership up for grabs if Shane does the same, making it a winner-takes-all match. Shane accepted the challenge, but disappointed Vince when he said that he wasn't the higher power. However, Shane said that he'll bring the higher power out in a few moments, and after a break and a look at the card for the night, the corporate ministry came down to the ring for the next segment without Shane there. Undertaker grabs the mic, saying how he's spoken about the greater power for months, and the time's finally come to reveal the higher power. He said it was someone even more evil than he was, and someone who had even more power than the corporate ministry. The greater power got in the ring in his druid outfit, and Shane walked out onto the entrance ramp, showing that it definitely wasn't him. Shane got in the ring himself, and he explained that the greater power is a master in human psychology, and he knows what makes all of us tick, and can exploit everyone for the benefit of the corporate ministry. Finally, it was actually time to find out who this greater power was. Before we did find out though, Shane said he'll give Vince the honour of revealing the greater power, just because he can't wait to see his face. Vince then popped up on the Titantron, and he said that the game was over. He's close enough where he is backstage, and he said the evil demonic SOB should reveal himself right now. And then, they would finally get to the reveal.
It's me, Austin!
Oh, son of a bitch!
It was Vince all along. He started bragging on the mic saying we all bought it, even his own family bought it, and he blamed Stone Cold for everything. Vince said that he had to teach Austin a lesson that he'll never forget. And now he and everyone knows that Vince will do whatever it takes to make Stone Cold's life a living hell. Stephanie and Linda came to the entrance ramp, and Stephanie wanted to know how they could be so cruel to her. Vince said it was just business, and love has nothing to do with business. He said he still loves Stephanie despite putting her through all that. Then Linda chimed in saying, let's talk business then. Vince starts to brown-nose Linda saying he loves her, and Linda says in Vince's own words, love has nothing to do with business. Linda revealed that she, Vince, Stephanie, and Shane all held 4 equal shares in the company. And before the show, she had a meeting with the board directors. She said there's going to be changes around the office, changes with the dress code, and allowing swearing and drinking on the job. Linda then announced that earlier that day, she stepped down as CEO, but handpicked her own successor. And that successor, a new CEO, who had full power and privileges over the company, was none other than Stone Cold Steve Austin. With Stone Cold as the CEO, he started to take advantage, putting members of the corporate ministry in matches where they'd be at a disadvantage. Austin announced as CEO he would be facing both Shane and Vince in a handicap match at King of the Ring. And Vince said 2 McMahons can take on an Austin any day, but he may have to add a few stipulations here and there. A week later, Austin pissed Vince off even more when he dumped a load of cow shit in his office, and Vince had enough of Austin's fuckeries as CEO, and he made the match at King of the Ring a ladder match, with a contract for 100% ownership over the World Wrestling Federation in a briefcase. To ensure that the corporate ministry wouldn't get involved in the match at King of the Ring, Austin beat Big Boss Man on Raw the week later in a singles match. At King of the Ring, the McMahons came out as the winners, and The Undertaker defended his title against The Rock in his match. However, Austin had something up his sleeve. Before the ladder match against Vince and Shane, he booked himself into a title match the next night on Raw against whoever was champion after King of the Ring. This meant that Stone Cold would face Undertaker on Raw, and Stone Cold won and became the champion again. However, Taker hit Austin with the title belt after the match, busting him open, and this set up a first blood match between the two at Fully Loaded. Vince said the WWF was not big enough for both him and Austin, and he added the stipulation that if Stone Cold lost this one, he would never be able to wrestle for a title ever again. But if Stone Cold won, Vince would step away from the company for good. Vince and Shane interfered in the match, but it wasn't enough as X-Pac interfered as well, and he kicked a chair in the face of Taker, and Austin smashed him on the head with a camera. When Taker got up, we saw that he was bleeding, and therefore lost the match. To give a proper goodbye to Vince, Stone Cold gave him a stunner right in the middle of the ring to end the show. The night after on Raw, Taker managed to avenge his loss by attacking X-Pac and Road Dogg backstage, and he dragged X-Pac to ringside to beat him up even more in front of everyone. This caused X-Pac's tag team partner at the time, Kane, to come out and save X-Pac from his brother. Big Show came out, attacked Kane and helped Taker, officially setting up a tag team with Undertaker called the Unholy Alliance. This made everyone wonder what was going to happen with the corporate ministry, and well, since Vince had to leave, Triple H went on to challenge for his first title and became the Game, and Taker and Big Show started this tag team. Shane officially disbanded the corporate ministry and aligned himself with Triple H in China. So that was the real end of the ministry, and the start of a new alliance with Big Show for Undertaker. I'm not going to go into the whole Unholy Alliance thing because this video is probably long enough already. But they did beat X-Pac and Kane for the tag titles at SummerSlam. And if you want me to make a video on the Unholy Alliance, let me know in the comments. We're going to leave it there though. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Click here for another. And if you want to become a dog yourself, check the links in the description.